It was late June of 1968. My dad was 12. My grandparents had moved a few months earlier from Tucson, Arizona to Concho, Arizona. Concho was very different, both in landscape and temperature. Sitting at 5,000 feet above sea level, the summer temperatures were around 70 degrees versus the hundreds in summertime Tucson. Resting at the edge of the White Mountains, the land is red, yellow, and brown sandstone cliffs and buttes against a larger ancient basalt flow ridge that lines the north from the Springville Volcanic Range. Well, Old Concho, as it's referred to now, sits among the high desert with large basalt ridge bordering the east and north. In the valley, a dry riverbed was dotted by large cottonwood trees. The buttes and ridges boasted large twisted cedar trees. Only about 200 people lived in Concho at the time. It's in pretty close proximity to the petrified forest. Therefore, petrified wood was found on the valley floor. There were also numerous ancient Anasazi ruins scattered along the valley. My great-uncle had moved his family to Concho as well. My grandpa had recently finished his engineering degree, and he and my great-uncle were doing highway construction all around the White Mountains. They had both purchased land in the Concho area for pretty cheap. My great-uncle had two sons who were a year older and a year younger than my dad, Tony and Zach. Tony was 13 and Zach was 11. They would spend their days exploring the surrounding landscapes, joined by my dad's American bulldog, Sarge. They had found quite a few ruins, numerous pictographs, and some old abandoned homesteads, most likely from the 19th century. Every morning, they would load up their bags with canteens, bologna sandwiches, and head out into the wilderness to play and explore. My grandparents and great aunt and uncles had only one rule that was for the children, and that was to return by sunset. As my dad recalls, on one summer morning, they ended up hiking towards the edge of the giant basalt ridge to explore. After going for about a mile or so, they came upon an arroyo running adjacent to the ridge. Large black boulders and giant slabs of sandstone peppered the wash. The banks were pretty steep, but they would have to cross it if they want to explore the ridge on the other side. They made their way down slowly. Once in the arroyo, they realized that the opposite bank was too steep to climb, so they started following it west to find a better place to climb up. My dad said as soon as they got into the riverbed, he started getting an unnerving feeling, like they were being watched. He said it was extremely quiet, no birds or cicadas chirping. It was hot as well, no breeze stirred the air. The further they walked down the wash, the more a sense of urgency began to build in his gut. He didn't say anything though, for fear that his cousins would laugh at him. About a half mile or so down the wash, it made a bend around a large volcanic boulder. Suddenly, Sarge began a low growl, hair standing up on his back. This actually startled all three of the kids. Looking around, they didn't see anything, so encouraging the dog, they moved closer to the bend. Sarge stayed rooted to the spot, growling and barking. All three of the boys began to get scared. They agreed that maybe they should just turn around. They noticed that there was a spot where they could climb out of the wash. They hadn't noticed it at first, but it looked almost like a game trail. With adrenaline fueling them, they hauled ass up the side of the embankment towards the ridge, the dog darting after them. The whole time the bad feeling was growing stronger with my dad. They stopped at the top to catch their breath. Sitting against a large boulder, they took some drinks from the canteen and assured each other that Sarge probably smelled a coyote or spotted a rabbit. Here, the game trail was more apparent. It had even worn into some of the volcanic and sandstone that protruded from the ground. They noticed that there were a lot of petroglyphs dotting the black rocks, geometric shapes, animal, human figures. There were so many. Finally, they found a large juniper with a trunk and ate their lunch in shade. Bellies full and excitement replacing fear. They hurried along the trail as it slowly zigged and sagged the side of the basalt ridge, avoiding large areas of rock falls. The pictographs began to change as well along the trails. Lots of spirals and horn-looking men. My dad even said there was one that looked like a UFO. Turning around a bend, the trail disappeared. Only open space of the edge of a cliff. There was nowhere else to go. The cliff dropped off to one side, and a sheer cliff going up about 50 feet on the other side. My dad, he was disappointed, but also a little relieved, as the sun was getting further west, and they were pretty far from Concho now. They could see the town in the distance, as well as the holy mountain and mesas that dotted the distant Navajo res. Even though they were disappointed, they decided that it was worth looking at the view. They started making their way down the trail when they spotted an opening in the cliffside, a side canyon. They hadn't noticed it on the way up. It was behind a large twisted cedar. The tree's shadow had hidden it. It looked almost like there was another trail going into the divide. The opening was about 4 feet wide. Looking at it, that unnerving feeling returned to my dad. His stomach dropped and he felt like it was twisting in knots. The hair on the back neck stood up. Tony suggested that they should detour and check it out. My dad protested, saying that they needed to get back. Zach stayed silent. He looked as scared as my dad felt. Tony laughed when looking at them and called them both sissies. He said if they didn't want to go, it was fine, that they could wait there for him and be babies if they wanted. That's when Sarge ran down the trail and was out of sight. My dad whistled for him, but he didn't return. Zach decided he would follow Tony, so my dad stayed behind while they entered the narrow black-walled canyon. When they moved out of my dad's field of vision, the wind picked up, blowing through the canyon and trees, making a creepy sound. It was quiet except the wind, and my dad thought he heard faint voices on the air. He shivered, the ominous feeling growing stronger. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and still, Tony and Zach had not returned. A large cloud had covered the sun, and drops of rain began to fall. My dad moved under the cedar to get out of the light rain that began to fall. He sat on a rock and began to shiver. Suddenly, something grabbed his shoulder. He jumped about 3 feet and screamed. Then he heard laughing. It was Tony and Zach. They looked extremely excited. "Luke, you'll never believe what we found," they said. "We found some Indian steps and they lead to a cave." They begged my dad to come see. It wasn't far, only about 10 minutes into the canyon. My dad ended up following them, knowing they weren't going to agree to go home until they showed them. Plus, he felt a little braver and more intrigued now. Sure enough, around a bend, and about 20 yards into the canyon was more wide, about 20 to 30 feet across, and there were indeed foot and handholds carved into the rock wall. My dad had seen steps like them before, when his parents had taken him to Chaco Canyon National Park. They were smaller than the ones in Chaco, and only went up about 20 feet to the darkened mouth of a small cave. He shivered, from excitement or fear, he wasn't sure. From the bottom of the canyon, there was no way of telling how large the cave was. They dropped their packs and decided to use the foot and handholds to climb up to the cave, against my dad's better judgment. The rain had stopped, but they slowly and carefully made their way because the rock had become slick. It took about 10 minutes to ascend. My dad called for Sarge from the top again, and the dog still hadn't returned. The cave was much larger and deeper than they expected, and the entrance was decorated with hundreds of petroglyphs. The light didn't penetrate very far in, but they could see light in the distance from an opening in the roof, so they entered. Light adjusting to the dark, they started to notice that the ground was covered with objects. What looked like rocks and debris now revealed itself to be pots, beautiful, painted pots of all shapes and sizes, black on white, painted with geometric patterns, and animals, red pots and even some yellow ones, large pots holding dry corn and crusty squash and beans. There were also pots filled with arrowheads and beads. They even found some instruments like drums and flutes. They didn't touch anything and kept walking deeper into the cave. They looked around in shock and in awe. They had just discovered something big, something very big. They moved now towards the second bit of light streaming in from a crack in the roof. The cave was littered with all sorts of artifacts, stone axes, pots of all shapes, colors, and sizes. As they passed under the crack, they noticed now that there were objects and alcoves in the wall. My dad moved closer to one, and his blood froze. He was looking at a human body. It was decayed skin and hair clinging to patches and its mouth open in what looked like a silent scream. He took a leap back. Tony and Zach also froze. The walls were lined with alcoves filled with dressed bodies, lining the walls as far as they could see into the darkness. Suddenly, an ominous and horrendous screech broke the silence of the cave. All three boys jumped, and my dad, looking in the direction from where the sound came, saw two red and glowing eyes. He froze, locked in place by those glowing red eyes. Suddenly, the cave was washed over with the stench of decay and death. The eyes began to move towards the boys, slowly. Another hideous growl, screech, jolted them from being petrified in place. The eyes were moving fast now, right towards them, and they heard what sounded like running footsteps. They turned and tore out of the cave as fast as they could. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them in a blind panic. The entrance to the cave was maybe 30 yards away. My dad looked back against his better judgment and saw a man on all fours, or a giant coyote. He can't be sure. He pushed himself faster, screaming for the others to also run faster. They reached the edge of the cave, having to turn around to scrabble back down the foot and handholds. Zach got there first and began descending as fast as he could. Tony was next. His face turned into a wash of horror as he went down. My dad's heart was hammering into his brain by now. He turned and saw the eyes only about 20 feet from him. The stench of decay was overpowering. It made his stomach turn. As fast as he could, he placed his feet in the first set of footholds and started clambering down the rock face. He could hear the creature's breath now, and even feel it. He refused to look up as he was going down, trying to concentrate on the hand and footholds. He heard Tony scream from below him, and looked to see Tony lose his hold and slip about 5 feet from the bottom. He landed on his side and began to scream with pain. My dad slowed himself a bit, still not daring to look back up. After what seemed like an eternity, he leaped from the cliffside down the last 2 feet. Zach was helping Tony to his feet, and Tony was frozen looking at the cave and ancient staircase. All the color gone from his face. My dad was in full panic, and not looking, grabbed Tony and helped Zach drag him away. They flew down the little canyon, Finally, before they passed the turn, my dad looked back to see the red eyes watching them from the darkness. Another screech rang from the cave, and at that moment, Sarge in a full run came from around the bend, growling and barking. He ran to the foot and handhold staircase and bellowed up that cave, the hair on his back standing straight up, snarling and growling. The sounds of the dog filled the canyon. As my dad turned the corner, he saw those red eyes retreat back into the cave. They emerged from the small canyon and stopped briefly to catch their breath. The sounds of Sarge barking and growling echoing down the canyon. Tony at this point was now crying, his face washed with pain. His arm, he said. He thinks he broke it. Zach was silent. My dad was then asking Tony if he could make it home. Tony responded he sure the hell wasn't staying anywhere near whatever that was. Suddenly, a shrill cry came from the canyon. It was a dog, in pain. "Sarge," my dad cried, but Tony and Zach had started running down the trail. My dad screamed again, tears coming from his eyes. There was no response. It was quiet. My dad thinks he hears something. He looks up to the canyon entrance. It sounds like drums. My dad sits there confused. Drums? What the hell? Is he losing his mind? The drums are getting loud. Is this in his mind? Where is Sarge? He can't leave him. My dad sees Zach tearing back up the trail. "Luke, we have to go." The drums are louder now, and he can hear faint chanting. Zach grabs my dad and jerks him to his feet. "Don't you hear that?" He screams and shakes my dad. "We have to run, now." My dad is woken from his grief as fear washes over him again. He runs down the trail with Zach. Tony is waiting at the edge of the arroyo, waiting for them. The wash is now running, about 6 inches deep. They notice for the first time that a large thunderhead has developed to the south. A huge, large black storm dominating the southern horizon, lightning flashing in the distance. A new source of danger crosses my dad's mind. He tells Tony and Zach they need to cross the arroyo as fast as possible. If it floods, they will be stuck on the side with the basalt ridge, with whatever that thing was. They make their way down carefully and slowly. Tony is having a hard time because of his injured arm. They now start hearing thunder rolling across the air, and the wind has increased. My dad is keeping a close eye on the creek, which has only risen a couple of more inches. They make all the way down and across the creek. The place where they crossed is only 30 yards or so ahead, so they scrabble their way towards it. The water starts rising now at an alarming rate. They start going as fast as their legs will carry them. They're exhausted, but keep pushing on. Suddenly, my dad, who is in the rear, starts to hear loud splashing coming from behind him. His heart drops. It followed them. It's getting closer. He closes his eyes, bracing for impact. That's when he feels something lick the back of his swinging hand. He turns, bracing for impact, and sees Sarge. Joy fills my dad. He bends down and gives Sarge a quick hug as the dog runs past, and the dog bounds after Tony and Zach as they climb out of the arroyo. My dad runs and begins to climb. When he's almost to the top, he hears crashing and loud snapping coming from the arroyo. Making it to the top, he sees a wave of brown debris filled water crash through the wash. He falls to his butt and watches as the flash flood fills the little canyon. Tony and Zach are lying on the ground, gasping for air. My dad tries to catch his breath. He feels dizzy. He feels tears welling up, and Sarge comes and licks his face. My dad sees that Sarge is covered with blood. He looks over the dog and finds several slash wounds on his back. His ear is also torn. They don't look too deep, but he can't be sure. Zach is the first to speak. He is asking what it was, but no one responds. Tony's arm is beginning to swell pretty badly, and it's only a few hours till dusk. They're all thirsty, and realize in their panic they left their packs in the small canyon, along with their canteens. They are no longer in a hurry. They are exhausted. They drink some rainwater that has pooled in one of the large sandstone boulders. They figure whatever that thing was, it's not going to be getting across the arroyo for a few hours. So they slowly make their way back to Concho as the thunderhead to the south continues to fill the landscape. The three boys and Sarge make it home around 8. The sun has set, and my grandparents and great uncle and aunt are worry sick. They are relieved and angry until they see the condition of the trio and the dog. The boys tell them about their horrendous tale, and Tony's parents rush Tony to the nearest doctor. That night, my dad sleeps with Sarge at the end of his bed. Despite him being extremely exhausted, he is plagued with nightmares. One that he speaks about all the time is especially terrifying, where he sees the red eyes looking in through his window. When he wakes up though, in the morning, his curtains are closed. The rain continued for 2 or 3 days. The boys don't leave their homes, still terrified of what happened. My grandpa and great uncle are convinced what the boys encountered was a mountain lion, but they are intrigued by the story of the cave they found. A few days later, when the weather is clear, they tell the boys they want to see the cave. They make the journey faster this time, using my great uncle's Jeep. My grandpa and great uncle also bring along a couple of shotguns and rifles in case this lion is still in the cave. The boys show them the arroyo, which has been filled with new boulders and broken trees from the flooding. They find the trail and start making their way up, my grandpa on the front and great uncle taking the rear. They find the boys' packs, caught in a cedar bush. They have been shredded. My grandpa figures they must have been caught by another flood, and they ended up in the trees. They finally make it to the little hidden canyon, which has been blocked by a juniper that washed down during the rain. My grandpa and great uncle get the log out of the way, and they go to the canyon to the Indian staircase. When they look up though, they can make out the darkness of the cave. The water washed away all signs of the boys' previous passage. My grandpa figures maybe at this time of day, the cave is more illuminated, so he and my great uncle climb up the foot and handholds to the top. The boys wait at the bottom, having no desire to go back up there again. It's only my dad and Zach. Tony with his broken arm stayed home. My grandpa calls down for them to climb up. They do as they are told and climb up. When my dad reaches the top, he is stunned. The cave is gone. It's only a 20-foot rock alcove next to a black basalt cliff covered with petroglyphs. He's confused, looks around. He goes over to the wall looking for cracks and sees nothing. My grandpa and great uncle end up questioning the boys. Were they making up stories? No, they weren't. Something attacked Sarge, and the boys hadn't made up being that scared. The dads aren't mad. It's a neat area. Maybe some other weekend they will look for the cave again. My dad and Zach know that this is where the cave was. There's no doubt in their minds. They found their packs and even passed by the UFO petroglyph, but they can't convince the adults, so they make their way to the Jeep that is parked on the far bank of the arroyo. As they load up, sun sinking low in the western sky, my dad looks back at the black basalt ridge, wondering if maybe it was all just a dream, but something in the shadow of a cliff catches his eye. He squints against the sun and sees 2 red shining eyes looking back at him. His blood goes cold. He turns around as the Jeep pulls away. My grandparents only stayed in Concho for another few months. As soon as my grandpa finished the highway project, he got a job offer in the U.S. Virgin Islands. My dad said after that encounter, he had nightmares every night and would swear that at night he would see the red eyes outside of the house until they finally moved from Concho. After he moved, he never had a nightmare about the eyes again. But it wasn't his last encounter with the red-eyed creature. He would see it again when he became an adult. But that is a story for another time. I wasn't sure where else to post these stories, so I figured I'll share them here. I've been a search and rescue officer for a few years now, and along the way, I've seen some things that I think you guys will be interested in. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time, they just wander off the path or slip down a small cliff and can't find their way back. The majority of them have heard the old "stay where you are" thing, and they don't wander far off. But I had 2 cases where that didn't happen. Both of these cases bothered me a lot, and I used them as motivation to search even more on the missing person cases I get called on. The first was a little boy who was out berry picking with his parents. He and his sister were together, and both of them went missing around the same time. Their parents lost sight of them for a few seconds, and in that time, both the kids apparently wandered off. When their parents couldn't find them, they called us, and we came out to search the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we asked where her brother was, she told us that he had been taken away by the bear man. She said he gave her berries and told her to stay quiet, and that he wanted to play with her brother for a while. The last she saw of her brother, he was riding on the shoulders of the bear man and seemed calm. Of course, our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of another human being in that area. The little girl was also insistent that he wasn't a normal man, but that he was tall and covered in hair like a bear, and that he had a weird face. We searched the area for weeks. It was one of the longest calls I ever been on, but we never found a single trace of that kid. The other was a young woman who was out hiking with her mom and grandpa. According to the mother, her daughter had climbed up a tree to get a better view of the forest, and she had never came back down. They waited at the base of the tree for hours calling her name before they decided to call for help. Again, we searched everywhere, and we never found a trace of her. I have no idea where she could possibly have gone, because nobody, including her mother or grandpa, saw her come down from the tree. A few times, I've been out on my own searching with a canine, and they try to lead me straight up cliffs, not hills, not even rocky faces, straight, sheer cliffs with no possible handholds. It's always baffling, and in those cases, we sometimes find the person on the other side of the cliff, or miles away from where the canine had led us. I'm sure there's an explanation, but everything's so strange out here. One specific sad case involved the recovery of a body. A 9-year-old girl had fell down and got impaled on a dead tree at the base. It was a complete freak accident, but I'll never forget the sound her mother made when we told her what happened. She saw the body bag being loaded into the ambulance and let out the most haunting, heartbroken cry I ever heard. It was like her whole life was crashing down around her, and a part of her had died with her daughter. I heard from another search and rescue officer that she killed herself a few weeks after it happened. Apparently, she couldn't live with the loss of her daughter. I was teamed up with another search and rescue officer because we received reports of bears in the area. We were looking for a guy who hadn't come home from a climbing trip when he was supposed to, and we ended up having to do some serious climbing to get to where we figured he was. We found him trapped with a broken leg. It wasn't pleasant. He had been there for almost 2 days, and his leg was obviously infected. We were able to get him into a chopper, and I heard from one of the EMT guys that the man was saying strange things. He kept talking about how he had been doing fine, and when he got to the top, a man had been there. He said the guy had no climbing equipment and that he was wearing ski pants. He said he walked up to the guy, and when the guy turned around, he said that the man had no face. It was just blank. He freaked out and ended up trying to get off the mountain too fast, which is why he had fallen. He said he could hear the guy all night climbing down the mountain and letting out these horrible, muffled screams. That story bothered the hell out of me. I'm actually glad I wasn't there to hear him say it. But can you imagine being trapped with a broken leg and hearing a faceless man running up and down beside you, screaming all night? I once led a trip to the top of Mount Sterling in North Carolina. It's a tough climb to get to the top, and about 6 miles from the nearest road. I was leading a group of 8 middle school kids and 1 co-instructor. We were camping out on top of the mountain, and it was a beautiful night with a full moon. The kids and the other co-instructor went to bed in their tents. I chose to spend the night in a hammock that night. I was really into a book I was reading, so I stayed up and read until about 10:30 p.m. I turned my headlamp off to settle in for the night. Everything around me was rather bright from the moon and from the position I was in. I could see down the trail we had hiked to get to the top. I lay there enjoying the scenery and noticed something moving along the trail. Bears are common in the area, so I perked up. As it got closer, I could tell it was a person. We were in the middle of nowhere, and there was someone hiking up the trail with no headlamp or any gear. I was just frozen, watching this person move closer to our camp. They arrived at the top of the mountain where we were and just stopped. I watched as what appeared to be a man surveyed our camp. I really could only see the outline of him. He stood there for what seemed like 30 minutes, but may have been 10. He then turned and sat down under a tree, facing our camp. He was sitting up in a way that I knew he wasn't trying to sleep. He just sat there, staring at our camp. I had no idea what to do, so I decided to wait it out. And I waited, just staring at the man, while he stared at my camp. This went on until about 3:30 a.m. Then he stood up, took a moment to survey my camp a few minutes longer, and then went back down the trail he came up on. I, to this day, have no idea what that was all about, but it freaked me out. I was paranoid that we were being followed for the rest of the trip. there was a group of teens that hadn't been heard from after their scheduled return time from a camping trip. A coworker and I head out into the general direction the teens had set off in. We had been hiking for most of the day and seen nothing. We're about 35 kilometers into the woods at this point when we start noticing strange things. Sticks carved like spears stuck into the ground, weird carvings in the trees, a child stuffed animal hanging from a noose up in a tree. This place was nowhere near any roads. It wasn't on the regular trails people would go on in the area. The really eerie thing was that everything was freshly carved. Somebody had been there within a couple of hours of us and made these things. Mind you, we're still looking for those teens. We kept on hiking and eventually made camp for the night. Still kind of on edge from what we had seen earlier, but we settled down anyway and go to sleep. We get up with the sunrise, hoping to cover more ground before it gets too hot. We pack up the gear and get ready to go when I noticed a bit of a shirt that had caught on a small tree and ripped along with some shoe prints. We were thinking, great, maybe we're close by the teens, when a radio call comes through. The teens had just been found 20 kilometers east of us, and now they're calling everybody back. All those weird things we had seen from the day before came flooding back into my mind, and we wasted no time hiking out of those woods. I'm a ranger at Yellowstone. A couple of weeks ago, I was exploring the Lamar Valley, about 11 miles from the nearest road, and even further to the park. There, in the middle of the trail, is a perfectly severed deer head. No blood, nothing, no ragness at the severed head, perfectly intact. This is weird because I've seen many wolf and bear spoils, and I used to find cougar prey remains in South Dakota with radio tracking just after the cougar made them. This was not any of those things. This head was completely uneaten. Eyes, tongue, everything was still intact. Even the ravens hadn't touched it yet. Right smack in the middle of the trail. And again, no blood. Even a human doing it made no conventional sense. It was a doe, so it had no antlers. Plus, why leave it in the trail? The whole thing, even in broad daylight, gave me chills. Just an ocean of waving grass, bison calmly grazing, and a perfectly clean deer head right on the middle of the path. Our park lets kids from school in so they can look for animals in the forest and the streams. One day, a kid finds molars. The teeth look like they belonged to a human, but the teacher said they were a deer's. I dismissed it and completely forgot about it. 2 days later, they found the body with a smashed skull and jaw in another part of the park. All its teeth were missing. A local newspaper covered it, but all they had to say was thank the spooky skeletons for good bones and teeth. I found a deceased man in a tree. I am a seasonal ranger for my local forest district. The rest of the rangers say we found about one self-harm victim a year. So here was the one for this year. When we go around opening parks each day, we drive through to make sure everything is okay. In this instance, I was driving through and had just lost sight of the road when I saw a man hanging from a tree in a clearing. He had hung himself. I called the cops. The medical examiner took an hour to show up, and he was the only one with a ladder long enough to cut the guy down. So basically, I stared at a dead body in a tree for an hour. I was surveying a remote restoration site near an old trail, and I heard someone walking up a nearby road. All the hair on the back of my neck stood up, so I grabbed all my stuff and started casually walking down the trail like I belonged there. I turned the corner and there was a shirtless guy swinging a crowbar around in circles. And when he saw me, he started yelling, "I got a crowbar, I got a crowbar." I think I nodded at him, squeaked something like, "Nice crowbar," and then I ran the mile or so back to my truck. I don't know my birthday. The date on my ID card, July 3rd, 1922, was invented by an Army enlistment officer. When I told him that I didn't know how old I was, I'm sure my mom knew, but she died before I could ask her. I would imagine it was written down in the family Bible, but that was destroyed in the fire. As for my pa, I don't recall him ever being sober enough to remember, if he ever knew at all. Never got no cakes or presents growing up. I don't think I'm over 100, but regardless, I don't have much time left. There's a story that I need to tell before I pass on. A story from when I was very young. I better start at the beginning. I was born in the Smoky Mountains on the Tennessee-North Carolina border, in a place called Blackberry Hollow. I was the youngest of 3 children. Had a brother named Jack and a sister named Mabel. Would have been more children, but my mom died giving birth to her 4th, along with the baby, a girl named Sarah. We had a small farm, about 40 acres or so, planted corn mainly, along with some turnip, potatoes, and greens. Kept a few hogs and dairy cows too. Weren't prosperous by any means. No one in the valley was. Wasn't easy farming on account of the rocky soil, but we did alright. Not from farming. My pa was too drunk most of the time to properly tend to his fields, but he did tend his still, hidden back on an isolated mountaintop, so no revenuer would ever find it. Lived about 3 miles from the town center. Wasn't much of a town. 2 churches, one a missionary Baptist church, and the other a primitive Baptist church. Which one we went to depended on the fancies of the woman my pa was currently courting. Couldn't tell you the differences between the two. The sermons always seemed to be about the various reasons you were going to hell for eternity. There was also a general store, which I never stepped foot in, best I can recollect. Didn't learn how to read and write till much later. And that was it for the town. As I said, it wasn't much. The town is now long gone. The government bought it up to form the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Heard that some of the buildings survived. Can confirm that. Never been back to check. And never will. After what happened there. Now, as you can probably imagine, there wasn't no doctor in the town. The nearest would have been a good 30 miles away in the county seat. That would be a day's journey at least, over narrow mountain roads. No one had any cars in the valley back then, for even if they could afford them, there was no way for them to traverse the rocky path. So what you did when you were ill was go see the witch, Ma McDermott. Now, Ma McDermott looked like a hag from a fairy tale. She was nothing but skin and bones, her skin so thin and pulled so taut that it looked like her skull would burst through at any moment. Her bony fingers seemed to be twice the length of a normal man's and were capped with long, pointy, yellow nails. She walked stooped over, with the help of a hickory stick nearly twice her height. Strangest of all were her eyes, pale yellow like a daffodil. It was rumored that she was over 200, and I believed it. She had a small shack back in the woods behind the general store. Here, she saw her patients. She could set a fracture, dispense a herbal remedy for morning sickness or the ague, and rub a salve on a burn. She knew some midwifery. In many ways, she was like the hundreds of other folk healers who practice in the mountain towns. But she was rumored to have a dark secret. There was an abandoned grist mill deep in the woods, probably about 5 miles from the family farm. It was said that there, Ma McDermott practiced black magic, seance with evil spirits, and even called forth the devil. All of the children of the hollow knew to avoid that place. My pa, who given his near constant state of inebriation, didn't teach me much of nothing, warned me multiple times to avoid the old mill, and I listened, until one night. It all started the day my brother Jack died. Believe it was March, for I remember the fields were aflame, the farmers burning them to clear out the weeds and debris prior to the first planting. Jack and I were playing hide and seek. I was still counting down when I heard screams coming from the silo. I ran over and saw Jack up to his waist in grain, his arms flailing, being sucked down like it was quicksand. A few seconds later, he was completely submerged. My pa told me to run to a neighboring farm to get some help. He, along with 3 other men, spent hours scooping out the corn until they pulled out my brother. His body looked so peaceful, like he was asleep. But even as a young boy, no more than 5 or 6, I knew he was dead. I never recall seeing my pa cry, but he was clearly grieving. He became catatonic, lying in bed all day, not getting up, except to get more whiskey. It was up to Mabel and me to feed the hogs, milk the cows. We should have been plowing, getting ready to plant, but we were too young to do that by ourselves. Finally, about a week after the accident, my pa finally got up. I remember riding into town, dressed all in black. I don't remember the service, but I remember the burial. As the preacher man was reading some psalm, I heard footsteps behind me. I looked behind and saw Ma McDermott standing right behind me, grinning from ear to ear, like a mad woman. Before I could scream, she vanished into the thin air. Later that afternoon, I decided to go fishing, hoping to get the image of the witch out of my mind. Just had a little bamboo pole, but I was determined to catch a nice big rainbow trout and bring it home for dinner, hoping that it would cheer Pa up. I fished for hours, going downstream further than I ever had. All I got was a few nibbles. I sat back empty-handed, taking what I thought was a shortcut through the woods. The darkness snuck upon me, and I soon realized I was hopelessly lost. The temperature was dropping rapidly, as it does in the mountains, and I had on just a thin coat. I kept walking aimlessly, praying that I would find my way, when in the distance, I saw a little bit of golden light. I ran towards it. As I got closer, I realized it was an old mill, the big water wheel having split right into 2. Freezing, I began to run to the door, when what I saw through one of the windows stopped me in my tracks. Propped up in a chair was my brother. The top of his skull cleanly sliced off and set down on a long wooden table in front of him. Also, in the table were various vats containing chemicals of different colors, copper wires running between them. Floating in one of them was a brain. Presiding over this macabre spectacle was Ma McDermott. I tried to run, but my body was paralyzed. I watched Mom McDermott remove the brain and set it back into my brother's skull. Nothing happened for several seconds. But then, suddenly, my brother's eyes opened wide. But they weren't his eyes. They were demon eyes. Devil eyes. Somehow, they radiated evil. Pure evil. Mom McDermott looked up at me. The same grin on her face that she had at the burial. She started cackling. I ran. I didn't know which direction I was headed. I just ran. Away from the mill. Away from the witch. I kept running, even though my legs had long ago given out. Even though my heart was pounding harder than I knew it could. Never once looked behind me. For I knew I would see the witch riding her hickory stick, cackling, grinning from ear to ear. Eventually, after what seemed like hours, I came out onto the main road that led from the town to my farm. I didn't take a rest, but kept running, all the way back to the farm. My sister was at the door, crying. I hugged her for the last time and went upstairs and tried to wake my pa, but he was passed out from the drink. I told my sister that Mom McDermott was after us, what I saw, but she didn't believe me and went to bed. I made sure that all the doors and windows were locked and got my pa's hunting rifle out. I sat by the front door, the gun, which would have been too heavy for me to aim, resting on my lap. I must have fallen asleep, for I awoke to my pa shaking me. He picked me up and rushed us outside before running back in for my sister. As I sat in the cold night air, I saw, from the light of the burning house, a figure walking stiffly towards the pines, moving like he was hewn from wood. In his right hand was a torch, still ablaze. Despite the distance, I knew who it was. My brother. A few seconds later, I saw my pa running outside, carrying the body of my sister. She was dead. My pa said it was a rival moonshiner who set his house alight, but I knew the truth. I never told him. If he lived longer, I might have, but he took his life a few weeks later. I watched him walk outside calmly one morning, carrying a rifle. I watched as he put it in his mouth and pulled the trigger. I was sent to live with one of my pa's brothers, who was the foreman at a textile mill in Asheville. For years, I had nightmares that Mom McDermott, or my brother, or what was once him, would show up in the night at my window to snatch me away, but they never came. For my whole life, I have wondered what was Mom McDermott doing with my brother's corpse. What her motive was. I have never come up with any satisfactory answers. I just hope that when my time comes, I will be in heaven with my ma and pa, with Jack and Mabel and little Sarah. I pray every day that I will not end up in hell with the devil and with Mom McDermott, the witch of Blackberry Hollow. I'll never forget that night. I am a park ranger, and that is all you will learn about me, aside from this story. During the summer of 2008, I had been assigned to a watchtower in the middle of a heavily forest area. Most nights, it was uneventful, and I tended to just read a book as I waited for my shift to end. However, this night, when I started my shift, the guy I took over from was shaken up. Concerned, I asked what was wrong. All he did was shake his head and said, "There are things in the woods." He didn't say anything else and just left me standing there like a jackass. Jerk. Well, I set up for the night and took out my book. It was The Mailman, and I found myself surprised by how much I enjoyed it. Sometime around an hour into my shift, something struck the window. I jumped up and quickly sat the book down. Before checking it out, I had expected it was either a big bug or some poor bird. It was a bird, alright, but not what I had been expecting at all. This bird was dead long before it had collided with the window, both wings torn right off and stripped of all feathers. It was bound together with straps made from long grass blades. This was the clear evidence that this was man-made. I quickly took out my flashlight and began scanning the area beneath me. I couldn't see much through the woods. However, as I did a quick double take, I swear, I saw a dark shape dart away from the light. I feel this needs some elaborating. I could barely make out anything, but when I brought my light over this thing, I only got a brief glimpse. I literally couldn't describe it for the life of me. This thing was fast. Too fast. Alright, listen up, you punks. If you're out there, show yourself right now. I used my most commanding voice possible. Nothing. As I drew my pistol, I heard the radio crackle. Naturally, I went to check and picked up the receiver. As I held it up to my ear, I could only hear static, so I at first assumed there was a glitch. But right as I decided to set it down, something stopped me. Call it intuition, something just wasn't right. And then I realized what it was. I could hear something over the radio. It was faint, so I really had to strain to hear it. Slowly, I could make out what sounded like faint, low humming. There was a pattern to it, a steady beat that started low, building up, then carefully dropped back down in an instant. I don't know how long I was listening to that humming sound, but eventually I turned off the radio, ready to radio it in. Then I realized I could still hear the humming. Without a second thought, I drew my pistol and turned around on my heel before steadily walking back outside. That humming sound sounded like it was all around me, following that same pattern. I still had to strain to make it out, but there was no question it was there. I swiveled around, pistol aimed at empty air. Every part of me was screaming to call for backup, but I wasn't sure what I needed backup for. I needed some proof of what I was dealing with, so I waited, on guard and ready, and then it stopped. As I became accustomed to the silence, I couldn't hear anything, not even a bug chirping. Cautiously turning my flashlight back on, I pointed it down at the base of the tower. Nothing whatsoever. Then I heard a creak. I immediately spun around, processing this information. At first, I dismissed it as the wood, but then there was another creak, and another. Something was up here with me. It took me a few moments to realize that it was just around the corner. In that moment, fight or flight kicked in full gear, and I chose fight. I rounded the corner and found nothing, absolutely nothing. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I was nervous, but I still had a job to do, and with no other option, I decided to call for backup, which I should have done that a long time ago. I realized that when I saw the receiver had been cut right off, I stared, dumbfounded by a few moments, before grabbing my walkie-talkie instead. But when I turned it on, all I got was a harsh whine right in my ear, which caused me to drop it as I recovered. Once I had, I immediately tried to find it, but it was gone. My situation was desperate. I was now completely cut off with some thing or other that seemed to defy all sense. If I was going to make it out of this, I had to stay put and wait for someone to come check on me. I still had my pistol drawn, waiting and waiting. I then quickly shined my flashlight outside one last time, and this time, I finally saw them, standing among the trees, staring up at me. They had been avoiding me all this time, so to see so many of them, you might be wondering what they were. And I'd rather not tell you, for my sake. I was at my limit then, and screamed, turning off my flashlight and pointing my gun right at the door. There, I stayed for the rest of my shift, unwilling to move from that spot. I consider it a miracle I lasted for the rest of my shift. By the time someone finally arrived to see why I wasn't checking in, I poured out every single thing I had gone through. At first, the other ranger looked at me like I was crazy, but when he asked if I had any proof, something landed on the roof of his vehicle. It was another dead, naked, and wingless bird wrapped in grass. Needless to say, we booked it right out of there. When I got back and made a report about what happened, I demanded to speak with the last guy who had been on the previous shift. I really wanted him to have it for not warning me of what was out there. But here's the thing, we never found him. We searched high and low, checked every single record for a trace. We tried to look up his name when we could remember it, but it seemed like he never existed in the first place. So, what the hell took his shift? A couple of years ago, I went to a rehab in South California for alcohol and drug addictions. My family and friends were beginning to worry about me a lot, so if anything, I did it more for them than for me. I was there for almost 4 months. We all got pretty close. However, tragedy struck and my roommate decided to hit the needle again. Needless to say, that was the last time he ever would, as he overdosed in his apartment, collapsed in his closet with a needle still in his arm. This is where some friends and I found him, motionless. We called 911 immediately, but it was too late. A few weeks passed, and we are still living in the same apartment that he passed away in. Being sober, and not really knowing what sober people do with their time and lives all day, we did a bunch of random shit to keep our minds off our old habits. On this one specific night, we decided to use a Ouija board. We all sat in the living room and began. We said the prayer, put our hands on the planchette, and started asking routine questions and got nothing. We were about to quit when someone had the brilliant idea of going into our friend's room that passed away. Sitting in the room, we pulled everything out, redid the procedure, and asked for, let's call him Brad. We then asked, Brad, are you still with us? Surprisingly, the planchette went to yes. Both a little freaked out and a little excited, we continued. We then asked simple things like if he was okay, etc. Everything was fine until we asked Brad why he did it. The planchette then went to BADGNE. We thought about this for a while and asked, is Brad gone? The planchette then started moving like I never seen it move before. Z-O-Z-O-Z-O. Over and over again. I had no clue what the fuck this was, but I turned to my friend, and his face was white. When the planchette finally came to a rest, I asked my friend what was wrong. We need to quit. We need to stop this right now. Being a huge tough guy, it was strange to see him so scared. Stop being a pussy, I jokingly said. That's Zozo, a Ouija board demon. He asks to be a friend or family member and then finally reveals himself. I took this in and kind of chuckled to myself. That friend took off and went back to his apartment while the two of us stayed, laughing at the demon and cussing him out. We finally asked what he wanted, and the planchette pointed right at me. Terrified, I asked, "What do you want with me?" It then started moving to the letters H-E-L-L. You want me in hell? It then moved towards yes. Are you going to kill me? The planchette stayed at yes. Getting a little freaked out, I asked, "How are you going to kill me?" It then started moving towards F-I-R-E. And then out of nowhere, the planchette shot towards one of our candles, knocking it onto the floor, starting a small fire on the carpet. We quickly put it out, and as we were doing so, we looked back at the Ouija board, terrified. We picked up the planchette and walked back to the board and said goodbye. And then we went outside to burn that board that same night. I refused to sleep in that apartment after that night, and I ended up relapsing after going back home. So I beg you, don't ever play with a Ouija board. And Zozo, I hope we never meet again. So I never had a Ouija board experience because I was always told to never play with them. But recently, I was at the mall looking for a game called What Do You Mean? As I was looking at the games, I noticed that there were Ouija boards right there with the rest of the games. When out of nowhere, one of the workers comes up to me and says, "Hey, you want a Ouija board? I'll give you 50% off." He seemed very adamant, like your typical salesperson, but something about him just didn't seem right. I don't even know where he came from. It seemed like he just popped up out of nowhere. But he was wearing a worker's uniform, so I assumed he worked there. I responded with, "No thanks, I'm not looking for a Ouija board." And then he just walks away to the back room. I thought it was weird though, because I was looking at the board games, and the Ouija boards were about 3-4 feet away from me. And to finish it off, the Ouija boards were like 30 plus, and I didn't see a 50% off sign anywhere. The whole situation was weird. I mean, I did have enough money if they were 50% off, but still, I wasn't looking for a Ouija board. I needed this "What Do You Mean" game to play with my family. As I got the game that I was looking for, I went to the cashier to check out, and as I was walking out the store, I didn't see that employee that had told me about the 50% off. I turned back, and I saw him. He was just standing at the back of the store, looking at me in a real creepy way. Once I got home, I told my family about the whole situation at the store, and a few of them said that it was most likely the devil or a demon trying to get me to buy it. It's weird, I know, but I wanted to share the story with everyone to see what everyone thinks about this and what you would have done in this situation. This story happened on October of 2004, back when I was still a third-year high school student. My friends and I stuck around the school late at night after having our annual Halloween party. We had agreed to try out my friend's Ouija board. It wasn't the brightest idea, but we needed a thrill. We found a nice spot under a huge tree and proceeded with our half-assed ritual. It was a total of 5 of us, 2 boys and 3 girls, and we were expecting some kind of paranormal contact. Rumors had it that our school was haunted, but we never really experienced anything firsthand, and it was Halloween when all the spirits came out to play. so we all wanted to get spooked. Also, we never seen a Ouija board firsthand before, so we were pretty excited. Our school was an old Spanish colonial house, built in the 1800s when the Spaniards still occupied the Philippines. We were in a section of the school that doesn't get used often, located beside a creepy old Jesuit house. People only go there when they needed to use the restroom, store equipment on one of the sheds, or make out with their boyfriend or girlfriends. We sat down in the middle of an open space, with only an exposed light nearby illuminating the surroundings. We were all having a laugh, scaring each other with what-if scenarios. It was your typical dumb kids doing dumb things. My friend who brought the Ouija board then placed it in the middle of our circle. If I remember correctly, it was the glow-in-the-dark one, which we found hilarious. But it gave us the chance to see what was in the dark. Not knowing what to do and going after what we seen in the movies, we all then began to place our index finger. We sat there looking at each other until one of us said, okay, what's next? We didn't know if there was a proper way to start the ritual. Plus, the board didn't come with instructions, so we decided to just throw in a question. Is anyone there? I called out into the darkness. If there are spirits living here, please talk to us. One of the girls joined in. We obviously had no idea what we were doing. Still, nothing. Not even the slightest bit of wind. One of my friends jerked the planchette, and the girl who brought the Ouija board screamed, breaking the silence. We all laughed at how ridiculous it was. After a bit of joking around, we decided to give it another chance. We all placed our index fingers on the planchette once more and asked, if there's anyone there, we would like to make contact. Don't break the circle, one of my friends jokingly said. Shut up, I whispered. We were just about ready to give up when the wind started to pick up. The stillness broke and the darkness around us seemed to move. Just a coincidence, we thought. Okay, but don't break the circle, I told everybody. Is anyone there? I was actually pretty excited. It was like a scene from a movie with dirt and leaves swirling around us. Guys, I'm scared, my friend sitting beside me said. My mom warned me about playing with forces we don't know. Did you die here? Were you killed during the war? Are you the headless priest? Do you know Jose Rizal? Are you a hottie? My friend giggled. At this point, we were all throwing random stupid questions, but nothing. This is bullshit. I don't want to do this anymore, my friend said. We were all thinking the same as well. Just then, a group of dogs from the neighboring house started barking at us through the chain link fence. These 6 dogs were growling and showing teeth. We all screamed and without finishing the ritual, ran right out of there. We didn't see each other until after Halloween break, and this is where the story gets creepy. One of the girls told us about an experience she had the night after playing with the Ouija board. She said she got home late after hanging out with her friends from the neighborhood when she realized she forgot the keys to her house. So she called her brother up, who was then still sharing a room with her, and what he said creeped her out. He told her that she was already home. He claimed to have seen her walk in a while ago, and that she looked really tired and saw her head straight to bed. Creepy, but no need to freak ourselves out, was what we thought at least. Besides, her brother must have been tired and seeing things. But then my other friend started telling us about an encounter she had that Halloween night. She said she was going up her room when the light started flickering as she was ascending the staircase. Typical horror movie visuals. After this, she said she saw the door to her room open and a dark figure stepped out and stood atop of their staircase. She couldn't make out the face of the figure, but she said that she couldn't move and she felt a horrible dread as the figure stared down at her. No way, my best friend who just joined the conversation said in disbelief. Something happened to me as well. He recalled that he was sleeping one night when he woke up feeling really uncomfortable. He described his vision as having TV-like static and a feeling of heaviness surrounded him. He looked around the room, and that's when he saw a bloody, charred face with red eyes grinning at him through the window. I couldn't believe what I was hearing because, in reality, I had an almost run-in with something that night as well. After the ritual, I was sleeping in our sedan on the way home after fooling around with the Ouija board when I felt our car jerk. I woke up instantly. Looking out the window, I found out that we had been hit by a huge oil tanker. I panicked and leaped out of the car. But lucky for me, my mom and I survived the crash, since the front of the car was a total wreck. I still don't have an explanation why those things happened to us, but thank God nothing happened after that. And ever since that day, I have never played or gone near a Ouija board ever since. Most people, when they tell stories of Ouija boards, it's when something terrible happens, like a demon possessing a friend, or somehow a ghost begins to haunt someone's home. Yet my story is kind of different. I'll start off with saying that this happened when I was in 9th grade. My friend had gotten a Ouija board for her birthday from her cousin, and my friends and I were dying to play. We told our friend, who I'll name Catherine for the sake of the story, to wait until we all got together to play the board. Our parents then drove us over to Catherine's house on a Friday after school so we could hang out and spend the night. None of us told our parents about what we were planning to do, since all of us came from strict religious backgrounds. We ate dinner and we also got in our pool, then got out the rules for the board, and we set everything up. The door had been shut, the ceiling fan was turned on full speed to drown out our questions, and we were all excited about what we were about to experience. There were 4 of us there, including me, Catherine, Jackie, and Beth. We sat in a tight circle around the board, and we all nervously set our hands on the planchette. Beth greeted the spirit who owned the board once we touched it, and we all started giggling. None of us really believed in spirits, so we weren't too worried about the planchette, quote, moving, or something in the room breaking. The first question was asked by Jackie, who asked if there was anyone there. The planchette didn't move, and again my friends and I started laughing. Catherine then asked the question, "What is your name?" Suddenly, the planchette started sliding across the board. We were all freaked out, and Jackie even screamed. Catherine started asking who was moving the piece. She got kinda angry and started watching the planchette with disgust on her face. MARTHABANKS. Suddenly, we turned to see Catherine shocked, and a horrified look was painted on her face. Beth started laughing and asked how we came up with a name that quick, following with the question, "How old were you?" 6, 1. Jackie and I noticed that Catherine had started to cry, very silently, but she was close to sobbing, big tears falling down her face. "How are you today?" she asked through tears. Beth had now noticed Catherine's sadness too. I asked her what was going on and why she was so sad, but she didn't answer. GOOD. Catherine laughed a little bit, then asked if heaven was nice. All 4 of us stared at the board, unmoving our hands from the piece. The planchette slowly spelled out, ITSBEAUTIFUL. Catherine quickly said goodbye, without any of our consent, before removing her hands from the piece, pulling ours away with hers. The rest of the night she didn't speak of the incident, no matter how many times we asked. Years later, when I was in 12th grade, I had called her up after not speaking to her in a while. I was still friends with Beth, and I had gotten way out of touch with Jackie. I still spoke with Catherine, but not as often as I used to. She had moved away, and she wasn't available to call much. So I finally got her attention one day and brought up the night where we played her Ouija board and asked if she still had the board. She told me that she had asked her mom to sell it since it was taking up space in their storage closet. Yet Catherine sent another text that got me very curious. Oh wait, was that the day I got super upset? I texted back to confirm her question and asked her why she was so sad. I now know that Martha Banks was her grandmother, who got a stroke when she was 53, another when she was 57, and the last one when she was 61, which killed her in a couple of days. I know it's a very touchy subject, but Catherine has said that she was almost certain that it was her grandmother. One of the reasons being that a couple of days after all of us had come over, she walked out to the kitchen to get a snack and saw that a picture had fallen down in the living room. When she went to go pick it up, she noticed that all of the pictures that were originally in the room were still there, and that the picture didn't have a frame. She then told me that as soon as she picked up the picture, tears poured from her face. The picture was one of her and her grandmother when she was a little baby. She had never seen it before. This memory always makes me go on the side of Ouija boards when someone says that you shouldn't play. Of course, there are dangers, but taking a risk can allow you to learn a lot of things. And this memory, for Catherine, I think, will allow her to remember that her grandma is safe and happy for all of her days. So I used to have tons of little paranormal experiences up until I turned 18. And then they just stopped. And nothing for nearly 20 years. But then about 6 months ago, I started getting super interested in the paranormal again. And I'm always reading people's experiences on here or listening to a podcast. And things have started to happen again. I believe the more attention you give to the paranormal, even indirectly, by reading about others' experiences, can give them enough energy to interact with you. Some backstory before I get into my latest happenings. I started dating my ex-wife in 2009. We moved into our house in 2010-11. Her family owned it before us, so she grew up in it basically. They always believed there was a presence in the house, but apart from a dumb teenage girl moment with a friend claiming to be a sensitive, or another girl claiming to see something, no real experiences ever happened. But as adults, when we moved in, we always sensed something here. Not really malevolent, but powerful enough of a presence to put you, and sometimes also company, uneasy. But for literally a decade, zero actual experiences. Nothing unexplainable, even when talking about the paranormal, and even making jokes, and trying to stir something out of sheer curiosity. Then, in 2020, we separated, and I moved out. In this new place, I sometimes feel a small presence. I chalk it up to either imagination, or maybe there's someone watching over me. So, who really knows what's there? Which we can't even see. We can only speculate. Now cut to 6 months ago, when I started to get super drawn to the paranormal again, and I began reading people's stories again, like every night, in bed, as I'm laying down to sleep. There was a story I shared with you all before, about my experience with the Black Horseman, and I mentioned how it seemed to, as I call it, stir shit up, as in, if you give them attention, they feed off that energy enough to actually interact with you somehow. And now it seems like the same thing is happening all over again. I'm starting to feel a presence, much stronger. Weird, for sure. But let me continue with the story. Around October, I got a new experience. I was in a basement bedroom, only 2 floors. The stairs are loud. You can always hear them, even over the TV or music. Even when you try to be sneaky, They're just so damn loud. On one morning, around 6:18, I remember exactly because my morning ritual is to wake up before any other roommate, get dressed, and relax on my couch playing on my phone until 6:30 when I walk out to leave for work. All before any of my roommates wake up for their routine. So I'm in my room sitting on my couch, looking at my phone waiting on time to leave. Dead silence in the entire house. Sitting on the couch in my room, facing my open bedroom door, I hear the loud creaky stairs as something slowly walks down to the basement. All 13 steps. I think this is kind of strange, as I watch the doorway into the hall. There's no reason for anyone upstairs to come down here. They have their own bathroom up there, and nobody gets up before me. But I think maybe it's a roommate coming to talk to me before I leave. I then wait about 1 or 2 minutes. No sounds. No lights turn on or off. And then I hear the same loud steps going back upstairs. Then, this is the weird part. If anyone is walking upstairs, I hear them. At all times, the floor is so loud and creaky. So if someone goes upstairs, you always hear what they walk to afterwards also. But this time, there's silence after the footsteps go up, which is impossible. I even tested it with a roommate later that day. Also, when I came home, I told each roommate if they were up during that time frame, but they weren't. I did everything in my power to explain it away, but there is zero logic to disprove it. I tried. Here's my next experience. Me and my ex-wife are still friends. She's still in our old house, and we're getting ready to sell it and move to another state. She's moving to a new state with a new boyfriend, and I will be moving to my home state. So we decided, since her roommates are moving out, and we have to work on the house to get ready to sell it, I figured I would move back in, since I would be there so often anyway, and we get along well enough. Immediately, the presence in the house is stronger than I had ever felt before. Every night, I'm still reading and listening to stories and to a podcast in bed. Getting very creeped out, dumb and brave, I continue anyway. One evening, I go with my ex-wife to help do some janitorial service at the church for a mutual friend who she helps out for some side cash. She's been doing so for months, and she asked if I wanted to come along this time because she hates going there alone, because she thinks it's haunted and gets spooked out. There is this specific room she hates and feels like there's always a presence in that room, and it makes her extremely uneasy. A friend was hanging out with us and decided to tag along with us. So the three of us get there, and she tells me to handle that room because I don't rattle easily. So she's in the bathrooms. The friend is just standing in the hall talking to us, and I'm in the hall running a cord, and I walk past the door to that specific room. I looked at our friend as he turns completely white and says as I walked past it, the door slowly opened, even though I had just asked the ex-wife to come unlock it for me so I could vacuum it, so I know for a fact it was just locked. Take that as you will, just the door coming unlatched or paranormal. But it felt unlikely, it just unlatched, as it is a heavy solid built door with a sturdy lock. They lock every door in the church for whatever reason. Anyway, I tried recording some audio in the room alone a couple of times hoping to catch something, but I have captured nothing so far. I'll keep trying whenever I get a chance. I also say whenever I leave, you are not allowed to follow us home or attach yourself to us, and you are not allowed to feed off our energy before we leave the church every time. Here's my third experience. On the first week of December, my ex-wife has gone out of town with her new boyfriend, leaving me alone in the house for a couple of months. A buddy of mine who is pretty sensitive to spirits and such is visiting, and we end up talking about the paranormal, and I bring up the strong presence here which has felt much stronger since being alone. He also mentions that he felt something watching us from the kitchen the whole time that evening, and nervously changed the subject. That night, I go to bed, read some stories here, get all spooked, and get sleepy, put my phone on the charger, turned off the lights, and laid down. I'm still very much awake after only about a minute or two since turning off the lights, when I feel something on the bed next to my foot. This feeling, it feels like someone took their open palm and just firmly patted the bed. I know I'm alone in this house. There's no way it was a person. So I calmly said, "Do not mess with me while I am in bed, and you are not allowed to feed off my energy. And please respect my home and my boundaries." I try not to freak out as I tuck the blanket under my body, as if it was a shield and would protect me. And I eventually went to sleep. After this third experience, and after that night, I don't read spookies every night anymore. All this shit needs to calm down until I'm at least not home alone. But here I am, typing this at midnight, when I should actually be going to sleep. And I should mention that I'm still home alone. So I guess we'll see if I have another one to report soon. Someone, please. I don't know what to do. I try to tell my wife about this, but she's a science teacher, and thanks to my history of practical jokes, she thinks I'm just kidding. There's something stalking me. I don't know what it wants, but almost every night, since I started seeing it, it has terrorized me. It doesn't touch me. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't communicate in any sort of way. It just fills me with horror. If what I'm about to say seems like I'm just rambling, please forgive me. I haven't slept in several days. We live in the second floor of a duplex, with stairs down to the back of the house, to the basement where the laundry machines are. There's a door at the bottom of the stairs, before the door to the basement, that looks out onto our back porch and into the backyard. 6 days ago, I was going down to the basement to bring up some laundry, and I glanced out the door as I passed, and there was a dark figure standing at the far edge of our yard. Her back was to me, and she was just standing there. She was looking into the woods beyond our yard. She was dressed in nothing but a light gown. It had lots of flowing material coming off of it that was whipping around in the air slowly. The whole scene creeped me out instantly, but I thought she might be a friend of our downstairs neighbor, so I just continued to the basement. And then when I came back up, she wasn't there. The next night I went down again, and as I passed the back door, I looked outside. The woman was back. She was exactly like she was the night before, facing away, not moving. The hair on my arms and neck stood up straight when I saw her. I was even more creeped out when I realized she was in the same clothes as the night before. That's when I did something I shouldn't have done. I opened the back door. Leaning out, I called to her to see if she was okay, but she didn't respond. She didn't even make some sort of indication that she heard me. It was freezing cold, so I shut the door and locked it. Coming back upstairs afterwards, I looked out the window and she was gone again. Later on that same night, I was in the bedroom getting ready to go to sleep. Everything was dark because my wife had gone to bed before me. Our bedroom looks out over the backyard, and my side of the bed faces the windows, so I have to go past them to get in. As I was doing so, I got that same deep dread feeling in my stomach that I had gotten the first time I saw the figure in the backyard. Something compelled me to hesitate by the windows. My hands were shaking as I pulled the curtain back a bit and looked through the shades into the backyard. It was a clear night, so the backyard wasn't shrouded in darkness. And there she was. The woman was standing in the middle of the backyard, no longer at the edge of the woods, and this time she was facing the house. Her head was tilted up, looking directly at the window I was peeking from. I jerked away instantly, afraid she had seen me. Her face was covered in shadow and hair, but I saw her chin and nose. A sharp nose and a thin chin. Gray. Her skin looks gray, I think. Her hair is black and long. I was so scared I jumped into bed and covered myself with the covers. The next day, I played outside in the snow with my 4-year-old daughter. She wanted me to pull her on her sled in the backyard, but just the thought of going back there made me scared again. So I talked to her into digging holes in the snow, but in the front yard. When the night arrived, things went from bad to worse. Somehow, I had managed to forget about the woman. Then, in the middle of the night, my daughter starts crying. Our bedroom is just across the hall from hers. I thought she might need to use the bathroom or was just having a bad dream. So I went into her room to see if she was okay. She was uncovered, curled into a ball on her mattress. I pulled her covers over her, and that's when she whispered to me, "Daddy, there's someone in my closet." Instantly, I got goosebumps. I turned my head slowly towards the closet door at the end of her bed. Normally, the closet is shut, but now, it was open. As I looked into the closet, there was a dark shadow. That's when I saw her. The woman was standing in my daughter's closet. Not even when it was clear that I saw her did she move or make a sound. She just stood there and looked at me through the cracked open door. My blood ran cold when I saw her. "Get up," I told my daughter. "Get in my arms, quickly, quickly." She scrambled up and hugged me tightly as I walked backwards out of the room, watching the closet the entire time. In my mind, I imagined her throwing the closet door open and running at us, arms outstretched. I just hugged my daughter and walked backward into my room. The woman never appeared in the doorway. I heard no movement from my daughter's room. I tucked her into my bed and stood there watching the doorway to her bedroom. I didn't go back in. I just stood there and watched and listened. When I finally got the courage to climb into bed, I didn't sleep. Sunday came and I told my wife everything. I told her about the first time I saw this woman. I told her about calling out to her and seeing her from the window. I told her that she appeared in our daughter's closet. She told me it wasn't funny, that it was my fault for our daughter's bad dreams, and that I shouldn't encourage her to be afraid of her closet. Sunday night, my daughter called me to her room again. "Call me a coward, whatever you want, but I couldn't go back into that room." I called out to her quietly to come get in our bed, but she cried and said she was scared. I wanted to go and get her, but I was scared too. I told her to pull her blankets up and cover herself. "Just cover yourself, honey, and you'll be okay." I prayed that it was true. I lay there, looking over the sleeping form of my wife and out into the hallway at the closed door of my daughter's room, and just kept praying. She kept crying a few minutes longer, but then she went quiet, and I hoped that she was asleep. Monday arrived. I put toys in front of the door to her closet. By that time, there was no doubt in my mind that this was some sort of ghost, but I still put things in front of the closet anyway, even though I knew a pile of toys couldn't stop a ghost. Monday night arrived, and my daughter didn't cry, but I didn't sleep. I lay there, looking at the ceiling, tense. Then around 2 a.m., I heard her bedroom door creak open, and I knew something was wrong. She must be scared, I thought. So I called to her like before. "Just come to me and you can sleep in our bed, sweetie." But she didn't come. So I peeked over to my wife, and the woman was standing there in the doorway to my daughter's room. Her arms hung at her sides. Her shoulders were slouched down. Her gown was dirty, like it hadn't been washed in years, and it was hanging off her like torn rags. I wasn't taking a single breath. I wasn't blinking. I just looked at her, and she looked at me, and I thought, this is it. I'm gonna die. But she didn't make a movement, never even made a sound. I whisper, please, go away. Leave me alone. Sorry, I couldn't look away. If I look away, she will get closer. I was sure of it. If I close my eyes, when I open them, I know she'll be standing over me, looking at me. At some point, she was gone. It's like I fell asleep with my eyes open, even though I don't remember her disappearing. Just that I was looking at the doorway, and she wasn't there anymore. Last night, I laid awake, waiting. I asked my wife to shut our bedroom door, because the nightlight in the hallway was keeping me awake. It was stupid. I don't know what I was thinking. Like clockwork, I heard my daughter's bedroom door creak open. I held my breath. Then I heard the boards in the hallway creaking, and I started shaking uncontrollably. I heard our bedroom door open, and I knew she was standing there, in the doorway, not moving, just looking at me. But I didn't look. I couldn't. I did what I had told my daughter to do, and pulled the covers over my head. I'm a complete mess, a zombie at work. I don't even want to go home anymore. I think I'm starting to see the woman in other places. A glance while driving, and I think she's sitting in the passenger seat of the truck behind me, or standing in the street as I drive off. Just sitting here at my desk, someone passes by behind me, and I jump. I'm afraid that if I turn around, she'll be there, waiting for me to look at her. And what if I saw her face? But I don't want to see it. I don't even want to see her anymore. But I don't know what to do. The only hope I feel is that, for unrelated reasons, my wife has mentioned about moving, but our lease isn't up until May, and I don't know if I can hold out that long. About 8 years ago, my dad did woodwork and refurbished an old 1800s wardrobe, and he decided it would look good in their bedroom, which it actually did. After about 2 nights of keeping it in the bedroom, my mom started to complain that it was eerie and she had a bad feeling about it. I remember her saying that about a week later, it started opening itself in the night and she could see a person in it, and that he talked to her. Of course, my dad didn't believe her and kept it in the room, and it just got worse. The house started smelling and the air became damp in my parents' room, and they didn't know where it came from, so they decided to look for mold, but they couldn't find any, so they just went on cleaning and spraying stuff to make it smell nice. About 3 months later, the activities got worse. The whole house was affected by it, and the doors in the house would unlock themselves. Shelves would open up by themselves, and the cups my mother drank from would always be broken when she woke up. This obviously scared my mom, and so she decided to sell the wardrobe. It ended up in the hands of 2 old people, who a week later sold it on eBay. We don't know where it is now, for obvious reasons. I also forgot to add, my dad, when he refurbished it, he found a panel under the wardrobe where a little red box that was dusty lay. Curiosity hit, and they opened it. Inside was an old cufflink button, a letter, and a strand of hair that my mother thought was off a horse, because she kept horses, and when one had passed, she would keep a strand of the horse's hair. Obviously, they put it back in the box and tried to find out whose it was, but they had no luck in finding who the box belonged to, so they ended up putting it back where they found it, in the wardrobe. I also want to apologize if this story isn't typed out correctly. I'm not very good at writing, but I thought the story belonged here. And yes, before you all start asking, this isn't fiction. This is something that actually happened. I experienced it. I saw a few things. I woke up at night and heard things and saw shadows. But all of these experiences were nowhere near as bad as the ones that my mother experienced. I have no pictures of the wardrobe or the items at the time. There was no reason to take a picture of them. But I'm sure I can try to find the wardrobe on eBay, on Wayback Machine, but the chances are very slim. If I have any luck, I will inform all of you. So to everybody out there, if you're out purchasing antiques or used furniture, please make sure you inspect them in detail. If you see something, don't open it, don't mess around with it, and return it before anything starts happening in your life. This is not something that happened to me, but to my husband and his mother. When he was 10 years old, we will call him Brett. His mother, we will call Kim. And my brother-in-law, we will call Mike. My husband moved around a lot when he was growing up. Kim was a single mother who left an alcoholic and abusive husband. Mike was an introvert, and my husband Brett was an outgoing all-American boy who always had to be doing something. They lived in 5 different homes and apartments in the same city, but the one mentioned the most is a 2-story home that was for rent on Maple Crest Drive. A week after they moved in, small things started to happen. Things would get moved, water in the sinks would start running, and the lights would flicker on and off. They had electricians come in, plumbers, etc., but they never found anything wrong. Things went on in this odd way for a while, but then more things started happening, like stomping on the stairs, appliances coming on by themselves, and shadows moving down the hall, passing their bedroom doors. Then about 6 months from the time that they moved in, the shadows started coming into the bedrooms. Brett often woke up to something moving in the corner of his room. He said one night he was sleeping with his hand over the bed, and something bit it. He also said that he would hear whispers, but they did not come in clear enough for him to understand. But the scariest things would happen to Kim. One night, she woke up feeling like she was being choked, but there was no one else in the room. She would be cleaning, and something would pull her hair. But she said that the scariest night was the night she was dragged down the hallway and down the stairs. Everyone thought that she was crazy. They didn't see the scratches, or the bruises, or the mental strain that Kim was going through. She then went to the library and got this book on the paranormal. The book instructed to put flour or baby powder on the floor. The first night, nothing happened. But the second night, there were prints in the flour. They looked like what a gorilla's fist looked like if you made it longer and put talons on the end. The next morning, they packed their bags and moved into a women's shelter. They never figured out what it was. All they knew was that Kim and Brett were being haunted. And whatever it was leaving Mike alone. Before I start the story, it's important for me to clarify that the paranormal here in America isn't seen the same as it is in Mexico, from where my father is from, and from who I heard this story. Here in America, at least from my personal experience, this is seen as nothing more than a cool and sometimes taboo subject to be into, and sometimes people consider it to be sort of a hobby. But in Mexico, on the other hand, it's seen from a much different point of view. This is part of our culture. The same stories that our great-grandparents heard are the same ones that are passed down to us. The stories of duendes, la llorona, nahuales, brujas, and even the devil himself. We're told at such a young age to treat these things with respect and to never take them lightly. To us, it's much more than just witnessing an old chair move on a blurry security camera, or maybe hearing footsteps in an empty room. It's part of our culture. So here's my story. My father is not the type of man to seek attention. He's a humble, honest, hard-working man, and as a result, I believe what he tells me. Since he could remember, he had the misfortune of being more sensitive to the paranormal than most people. What I mean by this is that all throughout his life, he has found himself face to face with most of the stories that we've been warned about. Even now, as a grown man, our entire family has grown accustomed to experiencing more than our fair share. It's almost as if this sort of stuff follows not only him around, but all of us, too. So this story takes place in Mexico, when he was maybe around 8 or 9. He was with his grandfather, who at the time worked as a watchman at one of his friend's stores. This specific store also functioned as a warehouse, similar to stores like Costco or Sam's Club, but on a much smaller scale. For those who are wondering, una bodega. It was around 11 o'clock when they arrived, well past sunset and into the night. My great-grandfather and his friend had struck a deal, and whenever he was on his shift, he could help himself to anything he wanted to eat, as long as he kept the list in order to make sure it wasn't marked down as stolen inventory. As they were getting ready for the night, my dad was told that he could choose anything he wanted to eat. My dad was excited to hear this, as it wasn't often that he was given the opportunity to choose anything from the store that wasn't a necessity without having to worry about having enough to pay for it. He wanted to make sure he made the most of this opportunity and decided to go around the store looking for what he wanted the most. He finally made up his mind and settled on a bottle of chocolate milk. Now, for those who are wondering, a bottle of chocolate milk is something valuable, especially depending on what part of Mexico you're in, compared to chocolate milk or milk overall over here in USA. So he started to make his way around the store and eventually found himself wandering the halls in search of the fridge aisle. After figuring out it was in the very back of the store, he rushed towards the low buzzing hum of the dozens of refrigerators. All he remembers was, and I'll say this in his words, an indescribable feeling of not only pure terror and true fear, but also an endless sense of despair. As he turned the corner, he was face to face with a very tall, thin man. My father tells me this man had to have been at least 2 meters tall. His initial reaction was to try and run away from him, but he couldn't. It was more than being just paralyzed with fear. He felt an endless empty pit inside him, as well as around him. He doesn't remember the face of that man, and he doesn't know how much time passed. He had lost his sense of where he was, and at the time, could not for the life of him tell anything except for the fact that it was him and the man in front of him. He does remember, however, that this man was very well groomed and seemed very well kept. Despite not remembering his face, he does recall that he was staring straight at him. He doesn't remember what happened after. He only remembers coming to his senses on the floor in his grandfather's arms, being questioned about what happened. His face was full of tears. All he could manage to choke out was that the man was there, over and over. His grandfather's first thought was that someone had broken in, and he rushed my father back to the front of the store, where the only lockable room was located, the owner's office. He told my father to wait inside the office, and that no matter what, to not open the door for anyone. He would be back as soon as he checked the store to make sure it was safe. But the memory of the man was still all too fresh in my father's mind, and he decided that he would man up and be brave by running into the man again with his grandfather by his side, rather than remain alone inside the store again. Despite his grandfather believing it wasn't safe, he could see the terror in my father's eyes and complied with my father's wish. After checking through each aisle and deciding that the store was safe, they both headed back to the office where my dad explained everything. For the most part, it seemed to be an isolated incident, as my great-grandfather later that morning told the owner what happened, and he claimed it was the first he had heard of anything of that type of stuff happening inside the store. It is worth noting, though, that the store was torn down not 2 months later after this incident, and the owner seemed to give no more of an explanation other than that he was losing money. Despite my dad not daring to outright say what he thinks he saw that night, it's more than apparent to me that based on his description of both the man and the feelings that overcame him, I think it's safe to assume that the man he saw was none other than the devil himself. Before I begin the story, I would like to describe what certain parts of Mexico are like. I'm not talking about Cancun, vacation beach destinations that people be taking to Mexico. I'm talking about deep in the heart of Mexico, in the ranchos, in the farms, where there's still no electricity, where there's no bathroom, no fresh water, where you have to walk outside at night in a pitch black field to go to the backwoods to use the restroom. I'm talking about everybody around you is a farmer, and those type of places of Mexico, which is pretty common actually. You might just not hear about it too much. So with this being said, I would like to tell a story of my mom when she used to do her nursing practice, when she was in school with a native community in a remote place in Mexico. She said that the internado, internship, where she stayed with the sick people, was across a bridge over a river, and on the other side lived the doctors. So there were times in the middle of the night when she had to carry a sick child to the doctors' houses where they lived. She said crossing that bridge at night was super scary because you could hear La Llorona crying out while you were crossing the bridge. Many of you who love paranormal stuff may have already heard of the word Nahual here in Mexico, and I would guess that also on some other countries in Latin America we call that way people who can shapeshift into animals. Well, here's my story. It was a cold night, I remember, because it was really weird for it to get cold on that side of the country. This was in my parents' house, in a small pueblo, or small town, and back in the day, it was one of the last houses outside of town. Not so many neighbors, but a lot of trees and nature around. The house has a long backyard where we used to have sheep. At one side, a small water stream and trees to the other side. The sheep then started to bleat very loud, something we could call screams. My father then went to give a check on a window in the back side of the house. I still recall his face when he came back quickly, and in a low, urgent voice, he told my mom, "Ve agarra a tu padre y a tus hermanos y diles que vengan ya ahorita. Go ask your father and brothers to come here immediately." They were 4 brothers, my grandfather and my father. When everyone was there, a few minutes later, my father started to tell us what he saw. In the barn, we had 10 sheep. At the moment my father gave a look, all of them were together in just one corner. At the center, there was some kind of big animal. My father described it as a bear, which makes totally no sense. But he said it was big, hairy, and it seemed to be eating one sheep there. This one sheep was screaming really bad. Then my grandfather told my mom to keep us inside of the house and to keep me in there also with her. If you go outside now, you may catch a bad air. So he made some kind of prayer holding his machete. So his prayer, I remember he said the names of my uncles and also my father's. He then went outside. That's when my grandfather started to yell at the darkness, telling things like, "Vete de aquí, no tienes nada que ver aquí. Deja esta casa. Go away. You have nothing to do here. Leave this house." My father told me that he saw how this thing was in a pose, eating the sheep, which was laying on the ground, still screaming by the way. And when my grandfather yelled at it, this thing seemed to stop and raise its head up towards my family. This thing was only staring at them. Not a single noise, and also no red or shining eyes. Only the shadow looked like it was looking at them. So my father decided to do something at last. He took a big rock. He picked it up from the ground and threw it at this thing. Maybe not the best thing to do in this situation, but I guess this thing was not that strong. Or maybe because it was 6 of us and we all had machetes. But when the rock hit it, this being turned its back and ran away to the forest, running on all 4 legs like an animal would. They then approached the sheep, and my grandpa said how the sheep was on the ground, but it was still alive, but it was completely unskinned. It was horrifying, at least. My grandfather then sacrificed it to stop the suffering. After that night, a family friend told us a story about someone new in town that apparently was a Nahuatl. He told us he spoke to that man and he told him to leave the town. Indeed, we never happened to live something similar after that. The story of La Planchada. The ghost is a female nurse. Some stories say she was in love with a doctor who ended up leading her to take her own life. And in others, she is simply a vengeful spirit who doesn't approve younger nurses. And in other stories, she is simply a vengeful spirit who kills patients attempting to ease their pain. Yet one story that everyone is familiar with is the one of her at Hospital Juarez in the early 1930s, where she fell in love with a doctor who was secretly engaged to another woman. She was unaware of the doctor's engagement and began having an affair with a man. A few months later, he told her he was going out of town on a business conference, but he was actually going on his honeymoon with his new wife. While he was gone, a coworker found the woman waiting for her lost love, and the coworker revealed the doctor's secret. The nurse fell into a deep depression, which led her to contracting some sort of disease. This thing eventually killed her, and she is now said to return to the room where she died. Whatever the origin is, the ghost is associated with hospitals, where it can be seen walking the halls at night and checking on patients. This spirit is often described as floating or walking, but always silent, and in some accounts, it even glows. Sometimes it's said that she appears as a normal nurse, a full human manifestation, and other times, it is said that she looks evil with the face of a horrendous creature. And a small detail that always sticks out is the uniform that she wears is usually out of date. Despite the possible horrific appearance of this ghost, it oftentimes heals patients it visits in the night, curing them of disease or healing them, and then moving them to other rooms to recover. The patients who see her describe a nurse who appeared in the room and somehow made them feel better. Hospital Juarez, being one of the possible origins of the spirit, is known for appearances of La Planchada. It is said that the ghost returns to the room where she died and heals whoever is inside. So be careful next time you or someone you know is in the hospital and you all have a pretty nurse that comes inside a room to help you. She also told me that the hospital, where she was a full nurse, was haunted by La Planchada. She said some of their sick people would report how a really nice, well-dressed nurse came in and helped them in the middle of the night. She said they would describe her as wearing an old-time uniform that hadn't been used in decades by nurses. But the thing that stood out was that they would always comment on how well kept ironed the nurse's uniform was. Now here's the scary part. Sometimes when they were at the nurse's station in the ICU, they would know when someone was going to code because they could feel as if someone had walked by the nurse's station and into the room of a sick person, but no one was there. They would then get an alert that someone was coding. The nurses used to say that it was La Muerte, or death, that would come and try to get the patients. Another story she told me was that when she wasn't practicing nursing yet, she was studying nursing under the monjas, under the nuns, and she said one of the dormitories was haunted. The two dormitories were divided by a hallway, and one day, all the girls were staying in the one that wasn't haunted because they were scared. They decided to roll a coin to the other dorm, and they said that the coin rolled through the hallway and into the other dark, empty room. A few seconds after, they heard the coin stop rolling and drop. The coin was rolled back to them. My dad told me a long time ago about a time when he was a teenager in Mexico, and it was late, and he was walking home after hanging out with his friends. My dad grew up in a rancho, and it was real dark, and the town that he's from is old. Anyways, there was no one out on the road, and he was walking, and he heard a sound, so he looked around at this abandoned house. The house was falling apart, and the windows were nothing but dark openings. He said he saw the back of a man sitting on the top of a roof with his back towards him. As my dad walked past the house, he looked back to see the man still on the roof, and my dad said that the man's legs were so long they touched the ground. I actually think my dad saw Slender Man long before anyone knew what that was. My family doesn't have a rancho or a ranch. However, we live near a mountain where there are 3 crucifixes, and each year in Semana Santa they replace them, which takes about 6 days. While they are gone, it is said that everybody in the community and around there says that the witches go out to hunt children. One year they heard chains being dragged on the roof at nighttime. My father told me about a time in the 70s when he was driving to his hometown in San Luis Potosí with my mom asleep in the back and her dad in the passenger seat. He said it was late at night and it was raining. The road they were on was empty, and long and had lots of turns and curves, and the visibility was bad. He said they both spotted a man standing on the side of the road in the pouring rain trying to catch a ride. My dad didn't stop and kept driving, and my abuelito, grandfather, commented saying poor guy standing out in the rain. They didn't think much of it. However, my dad said that a few minutes later, after passing another curve, they saw the same man again standing on the side of the road. It was the same guy. They both freaked out, and my grandfather said, "Es el diablo, it's the devil," and to keep driving. When I went to Mexico with my dad in the mid-80s, we lived in a rancho, and my dad told me to go to bed once because after midnight, some of the animals that have been cursed by witches start to talk, and they will come around looking for anyone who will talk with them. So if you live in a rancho, in a farm, or own livestock or animals of any kind, be careful if you hear them talking to you tonight. My mother lived in the countryside and told us of something that happened when she was a kid. She was asleep and heard a weird clicking noise, como una pluma, like the clicking of a pen. She looked outside and said there was a weird thing outside making a noise. It looked like a humanoid, grayish thing, just standing outside their house, looking in. My mom then closed the curtains and started blessing the house, and she said that she never saw the thing again. I want to say this was a skinwalker walking through the neighborhood, whistling, trying to see who would whistle or talk back.